I don't recall inviting you, Douglas.
The last time Douglas and Vivian Hargrove saw the inside of their own house, Nora was the one walking out of it. She had $340 to her name, a suitcase they had packed for her, and nowhere to go. The next time they saw her, they were standing in her driveway, in their best clothes, beside their luxury car, with their mouths open. Between those two moments, 12 acres of condemned land, a cabin that was mostly sky, where the ceiling should have been, and $7. This is what happened in between. The bag was already waiting by the door. That was the part Nora kept returning to afterward, even weeks later, even when she was pulling rotten boards off the cabin floor with her bare hands in the cold. Not the words Douglas had said, not the way Vivian had looked at her watch like this conversation was running slightly over schedule. Not even the silence from Marcus, who sat with his hands folded and his eyes on the dining room table as though the grain of the wood had suddenly become very interesting. The bag, packed, zipped, set neatly beside the entryway table with her good coat folded over the handle, like whoever had prepared it wanted her to know they'd thought about her comfort, wanted her to leave clean, wanted this to be a thing that looked, from a certain angle, like kindness. Nora had been married to Marcus Hargrove for 4 years. She had eaten at that table twice a week for 4 years. She had learned which topics were safe and which were not. She had learned the difference between the warm smile Vivian gave to guests and the particular version she kept for Nora, a smile with a subtle undercurrent, a smile that said, "We both know what you are, don't we?" She had learned all of it. She had adapted. She had made herself small enough to fit inside their world without displacing anything. And still the bag was already packed. The reason, Douglas had explained, setting down his wine glass with the precision of a man who signs things for a living, was that Marcus had lost his position at the firm 3 months ago. 3 months ago. Nora had not known. Marcus had not told her, had gone to work each day or had done something that resembled it, and had instead told his parents, and his parents had had 3 months to decide what to do about the problem. "You've been a drain," Douglas said, not cruelly, factually, the way a man describes a leak in a pipe. Marcus needs room to correct course. He can't do that with current obligations. Current obligations. That was the phrase he used. 4 years, current obligations. Vivian had smiled that smile. "We've put together some things for you. There's enough there to get you settled somewhere." Nora looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the table. She did not cry. She had decided that somewhere in the 5 seconds after Douglas started speaking, and she understood what was happening. She picked up her coat. She picked up the bag. She noted, in a distant and observational way, that it was heavier than she expected. They had packed her books. That detail almost broke something in her, that they had thought to pack her books. She walked to the door. She opened it herself. "Nora!" Marcus's voice, finally from the table. She waited. "I'm sorry," he said. I need some time." She nodded once. She stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind her, and the October air came at her face like cold water, and she stood on the stone steps of the Hargrove house for a moment, looking at her car parked in the circular drive, at the fountain that had been turned off for the season, at the maple trees going orange and red at the edge of the property. She had $340 in her checking account. She had a suitcase. She had her books. She drove. She spent the first 2 nights in a motel that charged $58 a night and smelled of cigarette smoke and industrial pine cleaner. She ate soup from a gas station microwave. She sat on the edge of the bed each evening with her phone in her hands and did the math over and over, as if doing it enough times might change the number at the bottom. It never did. On the 3rd morning, somewhere between the 2nd cup of bad coffee and a gas station receipt that said she had $187.43 remaining, she opened her county's public records portal. She'd once had a brief fascination with tax auctions, the kind of idle research you do late at night when a marriage is going quiet and you need something to think about that isn't the marriage. She'd bookmarked it without remembering why, but there it was, in her browser history, like a small note she'd left herself. Tri-County Delinquent Property Auction, this week's listings. She scrolled through them while the morning traffic moved outside her window. Most were vacant lots. Several had lean values that would swallow everything she had and more. And then, Lot 47C, a 12-acre parcel with a single structure dwelling. Condition, condemned. Minimum bid, $7. The listing had one photograph, taken from a distance, probably from the county road. A cabin in the trees. The trees were the same orange and red she had looked at from the Hargrove front steps that night. Smoke was visible in the photo, not from the chimney, from the tree line somewhere behind the structure. Something about that smoke, curling up into the pale sky without asking anyone's permission, without explaining itself, stopped her. She read the listing 3 times, then she read it again. She did not let herself think too hard about it. Thinking too hard had kept her at that table for 4 years. She clicked the button that said, "Register to bid." She won the bid at $7, which meant she was the only bidder. The county clerk who processed her paperwork, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at the lot number and then looked at Nora over her glasses with an expression that contained, in equal parts, sympathy and the specific professionalism of someone who has processed a lot of people's worst decisions. "You been out to see it?" the clerk asked. "Not yet," Nora said. The clerk printed the deed without another word. The road to the property was unpaved for the last half-mile, and Nora's car, a 2016 sedan with 90,000 miles on it, bottomed out twice in the ruts. She parked at the tree line and walked. The cabin materialized between the pines the way ruins do. Not all at once, but in increments, each step revealing another thing wrong. One of the porch posts had collapsed inward, pulling the roofline with it. 2 of the front windows were missing their glass entirely. The front door was present, but stood open at an angle that suggested the hinges had given up without formally resigning. Inside, through the doorframe, she could see sky where the ceiling had partially failed on the left side. She stood at the edge of the porch and put her hand on the nearest post. It was solid, dry-rotted at the base, punky where the wood met the ground, but the old-growth pine of the post itself was hard as iron in the middle. She pressed her thumbnail into it, and the wood didn't yield. Something in her registered that. She walked the 12 acres on foot that afternoon, through the dry leaves and the mud, with a notebook and a pen, writing down everything she saw. At the back of the property, where the land dipped into a natural hollow, she found a creek, 8 feet across, clear and moving, bordered by smooth stones and old sycamore trees going white at the trunk. She sat on a rock beside it for a while. The water made the only sound in all of that silence. She drove back to the motel, spent 2 hours on YouTube, and the next morning she began. What she knew about construction before that October could be printed on a business card and leave room for a phone number. What she learned in the following 3 months could fill a shelf. She learned to test structural members before trusting them. She learned to read the angle of a sag to understand whether it was settling or failing. She learned to remove a collapsed roof section from the inside out, working backwards, letting nothing fall until you understood what it was holding up. She spent $80 on a crowbar, a hammer, and a pair of work gloves. She spent the remaining $97 on a library card, a box of nails, and 3 bags of concrete mix. The library became her classroom in the evenings. She checked out every title she could find on timber framing, basic plumbing, and woodstove installation. She watched videos on her phone until the battery died, then charged it and watched more. The cold was a problem. Without a stove lit, the inside of the cabin dropped to near freezing by 4 in the afternoon in November. She worked until her hands stopped being useful, and then drove to a fast food restaurant 2 miles down the county road and sat by a heating vent until feeling returned to her fingers. Pete Dillard found her on a Saturday in early November when she was on the roof with a tarp and a rope and a plan she hadn't fully thought through. "That pitch is steeper than it looks," said a voice below her. She looked down. A man stood at the edge of the property in worn Carhartt, hands in his pockets, watching her with the calm attention of someone who has seen a lot of things happen and is reserving judgment. "I know," she said. "You done this before?" "I watched a video." A pause. "I got a come-along in my truck," he said. "Easier than a rope for that pitch." His name was Pete Dillard. He had been a Finnish carpenter for 40 years before his knees decided otherwise, and he lived in a small house a quarter-mile through the trees. He did not ask why she was alone, or why she was doing this, or where her people were. He showed her how to use the come-along, showed her how to properly anchor a tarp to a failing roofline, and when she thanked him, he said he'd check on her Thursday. He did. Over the following weeks, Pete became the thing she hadn't realized she was missing. A person who spoke to her like someone capable of learning. He showed her once how to do a thing. Then he stood back and watched her do it, and only corrected what mattered. By December, the roof was patched. By January, there was a wood stove installed in the main room, and the chimney was clean. By February, the floor joists on the left side had been sistered, and the failed ceiling replaced with tongue and groove planks she'd salvaged from a barn demolition sale for $40. The cabin was not beautiful yet, but it was solid and warm and hers. It was Pete who first noticed the spring. He came by one afternoon in early March while she was clearing brush along the creek, and he crouched at the bank and looked at the water for a long time. He picked up a flat stone and turned it over and looked at the underside. "This doesn't come from runoff," he said. "What do you mean?" "It's fed from below. You got a spring somewhere up in that slope." He stood slowly, with the effort of a man renegotiating with gravity. "You might want to have that tested." She had it tested through the county extension office because the county extension office was free. The hydrologist who came out was a young man with a clipboard who seemed genuinely excited, an expression, Nora noted, that was not common in this line of work. "You've got a documented freshwater spring with consistent output," he told her. "On 12 acres with road access. That's not nothing." 3 weeks later, she received a letter from a land acquisition firm. They had seen the extension office report, filed as public record. They were interested in the freshwater rights. They were interested, the letter said carefully, at approximately $340,000, subject to survey. Nora sat on the porch she had repaired herself and read the letter twice. Then she called a real estate attorney, because this time she was going to think very hard. The attorney's name was Sandra Okafor, and she was worth every dollar of her consultation fee, which Nora paid from the last of her motel fund. Sandra reviewed the offer, reviewed the property records, and spent 45 minutes on the phone explaining what Nora had and what leverage looked like from the inside. At the end of the call, she said, "Don't sell the land, license the water rights, keep the acreage, get a term on the agreement with a buyback option." Nora said, "Can you write that?" Sandra said, "That's what you're paying me for." The negotiation took 6 weeks. The acquisition firm pushed back twice. Sandra held. The final agreement was a freshwater rights license, 30 years, renewable, with a lump sum payment to Nora of $280,000 and a quarterly royalty thereafter. Nora kept the 12 acres. She kept the cabin. She kept the creek. She sat in Sandra's office after signing and looked at the number on the wire transfer confirmation for a long time. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket, the same coat that had been folded over the handle of the bag they had packed for her. She did not spend it carelessly. She hadn't earned the right to do that. She hired a contractor to complete what her skills couldn't yet reach: the electrical, the well pump, the bathroom plumbing. She was on site every day, asking questions, writing down the answers. By July, the cabin was finished. New windows, restored chinking on the log exterior, a deep porch with a cedar ceiling, wood smoke drifting up through the pines on summer evenings like something that had been there all along and had simply been waiting for the right time to rise. She bought 2 more properties at the fall county auction, a parcel with a collapsed farmhouse and one with a vacant lot in a transitional neighborhood 20 minutes from town. She had by now read enough to understand what she was looking for. Pete came by the cabin the week she got the keys to the farmhouse parcel and stood on the finished porch with a cup of coffee, looking out at the trees. "I've been thinking," he said, "that I might have a few months before my knees really quit on me entirely." "I've been thinking," Nora said, "that I could use a site supervisor." He nodded, looking at the trees, not at her. "Thursday work for you?" It was the last week of September when the local paper ran the story, a feature in the regional edition, small paper, modest readership, but it had a website, and websites have a way of not staying local. The headline read, "Woman turns $7 county auction property into growing real estate portfolio." There was a photograph of the cabin taken from the creek bank, the morning light coming through the pines and catching the restored facade and the new cedar porch. It was a good photograph. It looked like something that had cost a great deal of money, which was only partly true. Most of what it cost had been paid in another currency. Nora didn't see the article travel. She was at the farmhouse that day, pulling lath off the interior walls alongside Pete and a woman named Deja, who had answered the help wanted post Nora had put up at the library. She didn't see it get picked up by a regional lifestyle aggregator. She didn't see it slide into the feed of a woman in a well-kept zip code who recognized the name Callahan Hargrove from a wedding announcement she had filed away 4 years ago. She only knew something had happened when she drove back to the cabin that evening and saw the car. A black luxury sedan parked on the gravel she had laid herself over 2 weekends in June. Clean in the way things are clean when they live in a garage. It looked out of place in the way things look when they have been transported from one world and set down in another without being asked. Douglas stood beside it in his suit, coat open. He looked at the cabin the way a man looks at something he had already decided was impossible and is now being asked to revise. Vivienne stood beside him, one hand over her mouth, taking in the porch. The new windows, the wood smoke rising from the chimney into the September air like it had been doing this for years. They didn't see Nora until she was halfway up the path. Vivienne took a step forward. "Nora." She stopped, started again. "We saw the article." A pause, doing a great deal of work. "You've done... This is remarkable. It really is." Douglas said nothing. He looked at the cabin. Then he looked at Nora, and for the first time in 4 years, she saw something in his face that was not composed. He had come here with a version of this conversation prepared, a version in which she was still at some level manageable. The cabin had disrupted that version entirely. She had spent 4 years adjusting herself to their reality. She felt no impulse to do it now. "I don't have anything to offer you," she said. Vivienne blinked. We just wanted to..." "I know what you wanted," Nora said, not unkindly, just plainly, the way a woman speaks when she has spent 6 months only talking to people who listen. "And I'm telling you that what you came for isn't here." She walked up the porch steps. She opened the door she had hung herself, on hinges she had set in wood she had chosen. She looked back once, not at them exactly, but through them, at the tree line beyond the car, at the last of the light going amber through the pines, at the smoke rising and rising without looking back. Then she went inside. The door closed. Douglas and Vivian stood in the gravel for a moment. Then they got back into the black car, and the car moved down the dirt road toward the county highway, and then there was only the sound of the trees. The farmhouse parcel took 8 months. The neighborhood lot became a rental duplex the following spring. Tesnee's lasted 2 more years before negotiating a consulting role, and Deja turned out to have a gift for rough carpentry that nobody, including Deja, had previously suspected. Nora never went back to the Hargrove house. She heard from Marcus only once, a brief message, 3 words, sent on a Tuesday evening about a year after the cabin. She read it. She thought about it for a while. Then she set the phone down on the workbench beside a box of finish nails and went back to what she'd been doing. Some things you can restore. Some things you simply replace with something better. The cabin stood in the trees through the winters, smoke rising from the chimney, the creek running cold and clear and constant beneath the sycamores. On the nights when the sky was very clear, you could stand on the cedar porch and see the stars and hear nothing except the water, and it felt, if you knew what to listen for, like the sound a life makes when it is finally, solidly, entirely your own. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment telling me what part hit hardest. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear that starting over isn't the same as losing, send this their way.